Okay, so let's look at determining the scale when we are graphing trig functions. So first example, if we find that our phase shift is pi, and we found our period, and after finding our period, we broke it up to be pi over 4 intervals. So this works quite nice for us because we can start this with saying we have pi over 4. Breaking this up, next we'll have 2 pi over 4, which is the same as pi over 2. Then we'll have 3 pi over 4. Then we'll have 4 over 4 pi, which is the same as pi. So luckily here, our phase shift starts with pi, which is on our graph. So this is an easier example for us. But what happens if we don't have our phase shift on our graph? So for example, if I give you my phase shift is pi over 3 and my intervals, I'm breaking it up to be pi over 2. If you look at this, so I would have pi over 2 here. This would be 2 pi over 2, which is pi, 3 pi over 2, and then 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi, 5 pi over 2, and 3 pi. So what happens is my pi over 3 is going to be somewhere in between 0 and pi over 2. So we want to know exactly where our points are going to be on the graph. So if this is the case, we're going to have to do more math. So we want to have our pi over 3 on our graph. So what happens here is let's put our pi over 3. And now I know that I'm breaking this up to be pi over 2 intervals. So we are going to add, so I'll talk about this in a second, but we're going to just say pi over 3 plus pi over 2. So here we have to find our common denominator. So we have 2 pi over 6 plus 3 pi over 6, which gives me my next point, which is 5 pi over 6 here. To find my next point, I'm going to say 5 pi over 6 plus pi over 2. Finding your common denominator, we have 5 pi over 6 plus 3 pi over 6, giving me 8 pi over 6. Let's reduce this to give me 4 over 3 pi, which is my next point here. To find your next one, let's take this since we have a common denominator here. So we can say 8 pi over 6 plus pi over 2. Find your denominator, you get 11 pi over 6. So if we want to move backwards, all you're doing is taking your pi over 3 and now subtracting pi over 2. And finding your common denominator here, we get negative pi over 6, which would be going to the left.